Welcome to DIYeasycrafts.com. How to make easy wood chip micarta knife handles or scales. Now, micarta is typically made out of either paper or material mixed with a resin and then compressed in a press. This is a little unconventional. This is kind of a hybrid micarta. In fact, some people would even argue that this is not micarta at all. But I couldn't come up with a better name for it. So basically, I'm just going to call it wood chip micarta. The process is very easy. It starts with a variety of different wood chips. I wanted to make a wood chip micarta that had different colors in it. So I used a little bit of red oak. I used a piece of firewood in my backyard. I even used some dark wood. This is a walnut. And I just took a blade and whittled or chiseled away very small shivers or slivers of this wood. The wood chips that you want can't be very thick. They have to all be, pretty thin. There's an assortment of wood chips. Now there's a step that you have to preserve or stabilize this wood. What I'm doing is I'm just going to mix a little polyurethane 50-50 with paint thinner. This is a trick my brother Donald taught me about woodworking or flooring. They do this. The paint thinner thins out the urethane so that it gets absorbed very deeply and very quickly into the wood. The paint thinner then evaporates and it leaves the polyurethane to dry deep in the cell structure of the wood. So basically, I'm just going to soak these small wood chips for a few hours. Once they're completely saturated, I'm going to take them out and spread them out over a piece of plywood and just let them dry. I didn't do that for this knife, but that is the process that you should use. I kind of thought about that afterwards. Now I'm going to mix up the micarta, and I'm just using fiberglass resin. I did start with a board. This is about a 1/4-inch piece of red oak that I got at Home Depot. I wanted to have wood liners on this particular knife. You don't need the wood as a base. You could use paper liners or no liners at all. This is just what I'm doing for this particular knife. Then I cut up some t-shirt material into small pieces. You don't have to be real accurate with this. Small pieces that overlap are absolutely fine. You want to make sure that every square inch of that material is completely saturated with fiberglass resin. I did mix a few drops of blue paint in with that resin, and my feeling is that it helps to hide the fact that resin turns yellow over time. Now the whole principle here is that we want to add enough material to the bed or to the base of this micarta so that when we add the wood chips, they can get embedded into that material. Fiberglass resin in itself, when it hardens, is not very strong. All of the strength from fiberglass comes from the material, the fiberglass cloth. And it's the same principle here. We want the wood chips to get pushed down into the cloth and surrounded by the cloth so that these knife scales are very strong. So what I've done here is I've just completely saturated the wood chips in fiberglass resin, and I'm now just scooping them out and placing them on top of that blue material. And of course, you could use any colors you want. You could, this would look really pretty dynamic on a black background, or even a purple background would be nice. The varieties are endless, basically. Once I've got all the wood chips spread out, it's time to set up the press. Now, before I started this, I did put some wax paper into that press. My micarta press is very simple. It's just made out of 3 4x4s that are attached to a piece of wood. 2 for the base, leaving a space in the middle, and then one on top that's going to press into that channel. So I've wrapped up this micarta mixture in that wax paper. I'm then going to take the top piece of my press. Now, I use the press on a piece of wood over a garbage can. And I do this because once I put my 4 clamps in place and start pressing down on this, the excess fiberglass that oozes out each side of that press basically just drips right into the garbage can. It's a very easy cleanup. I use 4 clamps, and what I do is as I'm clamping it, I just look at each side to make sure that the spacing on the left is pretty close to the same as on the right. You want to end up with a fairly flat piece of micarta as the finished product. After it dries, you take it out of the press, unwrap the wax paper, and now you get a pretty good indication as to what the final product is going to look like. So here we've got the wood chip micarta, blue background, a neat assortment of colors in the wood of the chips, and a wood spacer for a liner or a wood liner. Now the wood liner turns out to be just as thick as the bolsters on this knife that I'm working on. So I am going to sand it down a little bit, as this one has already done. Because otherwise I'd be grinding away all of this nice micarta. You wouldn't see anything. You would just end up with wood scales. So I'm just going to use my 2-inch belt sander, and I'm going to basically just sand away the thickness of that wood liner, probably making it about half as thick as it was. It was a 1/4 inch. I'm going to bring it down to about 1/8 of an inch. More important than the thickness is that it is less thick than your bolsters, and that both sides are basically uniform and the same. All right, so both of those are ready. They're basically cut out, rough shape. I've drilled holes through them, and I'm just going to mount them with a 2-part epoxy, just like you would any knife scales. They're also going to attach with brass pins. I'm using 1/4 inch brass pins. I put some painter's tape over the blade of the knife so I don't get any epoxy onto that blade, which from experience I know is a real pain in the neck to get off. I just use vice grips to grab onto each one of those pins. It gives me a little bit more power to push those pins through. And once the pins protrude, then I can move this whole assembly over to a vise and clamp the whole thing together. I use a vise as well as an assortment of clamps. You really want to squeeze this together nice and firm, and then you're going to want to walk away from this and let this 2-part epoxy dry completely, usually overnight. Now once the epoxy is dry, you can work these wood chip micarta scales just like you would any knife handles. You can shape them with almost any woodworking tool. I'm using a 2-inch belt sander to bring it into the basic shape, pretty quickly. I also use a Dremel grinder to kind of round over all of the edges and shape it so that it feels good in your hand. And then you can use, an oscillating sander, and you can use sandpaper, etc., and eventually to a buffing wheel. So this is just the 2-inch sander. I've ground down the brass pins, and I'm just starting the shaping process on each side of the knife, making sure that the handles or the scales on each side are kind of uniform in shape and thickness. Then I'm moving over to the Dremel grinder. This is one of my favorite parts of the whole process. I kind of like whittling these knife handles into shape. The Dremel grinder does a great job. It's nice and quick, especially with curving the sharp edges on the scales. And really after this, just a little sanding with an 80 grit on an oscillating sander, and then I went to a 220, and then I brought it over to the buffing wheel and just buffed it a little bit. A very easy do-it-yourself wood chip micarta knife handles or knife scales. What's really interesting about these scales is that depending on the light and depending on the background, they almost look like they're different colors depending on how you look at them. There's a variety of different shades of wood, blue material background, and I was very happy with the results. Now, please check us out on the web at DIYeasycrafts.com. If you liked this video, if you found it helpful at all, I ask that you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you very much.